Okay, welcome. I have been working on this whole cloth, and you know this is Studio B Live with Geraldine Wilkins, Living Water Quilter. And in Studio B, it's always a live session that you can join me as I work on a project. So I've been working on this whole cloth quilt panel, and the previous live sessions were about the filler background. That was the first part. Well, I should say the second. The first part was putting in these channels. I need to stitch channels to stabilize the quilt and then section off different areas to fill in free motion quilting. So I've done that. Then the next stage was quilting the hair. And that's another session, and you can see how I stitched some of the hair in that session. Always available on my YouTube channel under the playlist Studio Live B. So I worked on the hair, and in that session, I talked about adding different colors, not just black thread, but also incorporating some highlights. I'm going to, let's see if I can brighten this up just a little bit. Hopefully you can see the detail. Then, after I was off camera, I decided to make the edge along here blend more with the background. I took some black thread and went over the edge so that the hair is not just on the silhouette, but it gives this feeling of depth. So I did that along this area as also along the hairline on the face. Then I stitched the face, and let me tell you, I was really nervous about this. I'm new to stitching faces. The other Beautiful Sister fabric panels that I've stitched, I left the face unstitched, but they were small. They were 8 by 10 inches, and this is big. I didn't want to leave it completely unstitched. I did a little research, and I know that I will need to improve on stitching faces and learning about shadows and contours to help make it look three-dimensional. So, considering that that is not my specialty, I am somewhat satisfied. I know I can do better, but I did do some curve stitching along the bottom and around the cheek area to give it the impression of cheeks to add dimension. And anyway, that's what I end up doing. And I tried not to stitch too much because once it's in there with this very tight density, and again, I used was it a 50 weight? No, I didn't use 50 weight. I used an 80 weight thread, 80 weight thread here because I didn't want the thread to be too heavy because I knew I had to stitch a lot. Now, initially, I started down here at the neck because I've seen some faces that were stitched with just straight lines, and that seemed to work very nicely. And then I had a problem. The thread that I was using, which is mostly here and here, I wanted to use in the whole face, but was unable to because it kept breaking. And I tested and tested and tested, and I'm too far into the deadline. I wouldn't be able to ship a new spool. So I had to find one that was a close match. It's a little bit darker. So, you know what? You find a solution based on what you have. And so I found something that I think works. Not ideal, but it works. And then the next to last session was about stitching the neck area and the ear. So you can go watch that video to see how I stitch this. And so I haven't been here for a few days because I've been working on the words that I wanted to add. So this now is about adding words. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to stitch in a project. Sometimes I get the inspiration as I'm working on the project because I'm thinking about the project on many levels. And I decided that I wanted to add words. So that took me like a day or so. I also got some input from my niece about the wording and what the theme is. So I chose a theme based on two chapters in the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 and Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is one of my favorite Psalms. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. Hello, Marcia. So glad that you're here. Have I tried Micro Quilter by Superior Threads? What weight thread is that? Is that like a 80 or 100? I did test ahead of time the different weights that I had, and I'm going to talk about that when it comes to stitching the words. Thank you, Marsha. I'm glad you like it. So I wanted to show you. So if you missed all the sessions where I did the background, the channels, the hair, you can go back and watch that. Right now, I want to share with you some of the testing I did for the words. So many of us type on keyboards. We don't necessarily handwrite. So I knew I had to practice first my handwriting and then how to cursive stitch, which is one that I wanted to do, continuous lettering. Mostly all in lowercase has been my decision. And to do that, oh, okay, thank you, Marcia. It's for quilting tiny things. Well, I don't have Superior Threads micro quilting, but I'll look into that. I do have some, what's that brand? Um, what's the other brands, Marcia? Why can't I think of it? It is, it's not Connecting Threads, it's not Glide, it's another brand where I had several 100 weight and a couple of 80 weight, all for stitching in tiny areas. And so I thought I would use 60 weight for the words. No, it's not Orville. It's another company. And I know I'm having a brain freeze on that. So I did some testing with the 60 weight. I also tried, oh, I didn't have the right color for an 80, but I thought 60 would be perfect, right? For very tiny stitching based on letters and a half inch. So I drew some lines that are a half inch apart and I needed to practice. Oh, Michael Quilter is 100. Yeah, I have 100 too, but I can't remember the name of the brand. And I didn't have the right color. It was like a rainbow of colors, and I wanted something that was close to white, but not white. I'm using a silver gray color now. White, I thought would be too bright. So, anyway, half inch channels, practicing my cursive, and then practicing the stitch length. I'm using the Bernina Q20 sit down, and because I'm using the stitch regulator, I can increase the stitches per inch. Yes, I do use Superior Thread needles. I love their needles, and that's what I'm using now. I like their titanium coated needles. So I tested 10 inches, 10 stitches per inch, 11 stitches per inch, and 12. I ended up at 12 stitches per inch. And it's a step-by-step process. So I wanted to share that. That one, I had to practice my own handwriting. Two, I needed to practice all lowercase. I also had to pre-print out the phrases that I wanted to stitch and then practice those specific phrases on this and practice with two different thread weights and then practice with different stitches per inch. Yes, cursive is so beautiful. I wish students still learned it in school. Hopefully, some are still teaching it. And 12 has been good. And then I switched because I tested. I felt the 60 was too light. I went to 40, which I'm kind of surprised at. And the 80 was too light. The 60 was too light. I could have used 50, but I didn't have 50 in the glide thread, which is what I wanted. Yeah, I know what you mean about the stitch regulation, Marcia. Now, if I did not have stitch regulation on this and it was manual only, it does have manual feature, I would just practice. I would practice being able to stitch those smaller um, stitches and just know that it wasn't going to be consistent. Even in this practice, at some point, I have to get to the real quilt, which I have done. I said, finally, today, after 2 days of prep just to get all the sayings, the practice, the thread, I finally started stitching. And it's not perfect. You know, the spacing in between the letters, I didn't want to break a lot of thread. So I struggle a little bit with consistent spacing between each word and then consistency in the placement of the letters within the channel. And I'm okay with that. I know that the more I do this, the better it'll become. This is definitely learning for me. And I knew that I needed to have the phrase printed out so that I could actually look at it word by word and even letter by letter to make sure I don't misspell words as I stitch. So I'm going to stitch a little bit so that you can see my pace, and I'm moving it all around to get in position. Here we go. Well, that's a wonderful way to give to family, Marcia. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Yeah. So now I'm going to work on this next phrase. I'm going to keep it close by. And I do need my gloves for this type of stitching. I can't use the discs, and getting the quilt to lay exactly as I need it so that it doesn't bump against anything as I'm stitching the words. That's always challenging. So sorry for all the movement. Okay. And also getting the camera angle so that you can see. All right. And then I have to remember my seam allowance when I put on, I'm not going to put a binding on this. I'm going to do a, what do you call it? Facing. I'm going to face this quilt. It's not going to have a binding. So here are my gloves. My words are right here, and I'm ready to start stitching. And one thing that I'm doing in this project, especially with a whole cloth, you think, well, what bobbin thread would you use? Especially for something with words, I'm using a bobbin thread that matches this color. so that if for some reason the tension is off a little bit, you're not going to see little white dots or gray dots. You're going to only see this fabric. Okay, here we go. Stitching in a 1/2 inch of space. Okay, that's one word. I stop. Okay, second word. And in between each word, I look at the sheet. Okay, the next word. So on my hands, I know exactly which direction I want to go. And for some reason, I was having problems with the letter R. I also have a pen here. If for some reason I'm like, wait, how do I stitch that letter again? So one of the challenges that I faced when I was stitching this on the practice was, what about letters like Y and G, where you have a loop that goes to the bottom? I have a 1/4 inch channel where I've decided to allow the loop to go in so that it doesn't go into the 1/2 inch channel below. So 1/2 inch, 1/4, 1/2. If I have a letter like a Y or a G in this lower section, I have made a command decision to allow the loop to go into the background. I tried not to do that, but that meant I had to squeeze in the loop in this 1/2 inch channel. And I said, nope, not going to do that. I'm just going to let it go right in the background. So here's my loop for the Y. Next word. So I'm going pretty slow, taking my time. Okay, next word. Now I'm turning it so you can see, but also have to recognize, will I be able to stitch? So here's a P. The other thing too about stitching letters is knowing where to stop when you need to reposition your hands, like not in the middle of a curve. Okay, that word is finished. The next word. Okay, next word. Okay. Let's see if I can get in a little tighter so that you can see. I'll zoom in. Okay, now here's a long word. And when you're writing out a phrase, is it going to fit? And if it doesn't fit, where do you stop to go to the next line? So I'm nearing the end and I need to decide how many more words can I fit in this phrase. There's two short words and then there's a long word. So I'm going to just end with the next two words. They're short. All right, it just fit. And I'm getting an indicator that my bobbin is low. Let me bring this back out. So that's it for this live session. Stitching words. Remember, you want to practice with not only your cursive, writing the letters by hand, then also practicing with different thread weights, which one will work for your specific project, and then having on hand the actual phrases or words nearby so that you remember exactly what it is you want to stitch, and practicing your spacing of the letters for the area you're going to put. For me, it was 1/2 inch spacing top to bottom, and then I had to practice how much space I want in between words. And how do I want to position certain letters, like those that have a loop on the bottom, like a Y, where it's going to have a loop go below that 1/2 inch line. Is there space for that in the project? Have I allowed for that type of space? So thank you for joining me for this session of Studio B Live. This is almost done. I have several areas where I've already stitched in words. And I think the next time you'll see me live is when I'm doing the facing, which I don't know that I'll do it on this machine, Studio B. Maybe I'll bring it into my other space. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for joining me. See you next time. I'm Geraldine Wilkins, the Living Water Quilter. Join me on the first and third Friday live here on the YouTube channel for Quilt Conversations Live. So the next one will be in the new year. See you then.